Hello and welcome. This is Thursday. Sorry, Thursday, December the 3rd. I have two videos today because I felt one was so important I had to set it off by itself because those terms that are on that page that are right up here, the terms here, and the explanation of those terms, which is on the other video, are so important to you going forward because they're going to keep coming back. You need to know what a conservative is, what a reactionary is. You need to know what a liberal is. You need to know the term left wing, right wing, because going forward, you're going to be using that a lot, particularly you guys who, well, you take American History AP, you take AP Gov, and if you just get into a political discussion, they are handy. And those terms came from the French Revolution. And so let us begin with today talking about, yes, after the things began falling apart in France, after the king had been put under house arrest because he tried to slip away, after the emigres, Emigres, had slipped out of France to go and try and get help, and they went to all the crown heads of Europe, and Leopold II, who, of course, Leopold II, the great liberal king of Austria, emperor of Austria, was very concerned about his sister, Marie Antoinette. Yeah, Leopold II, his sister is Marie Antoinette. And King Frederick the Great of Prussia were all very concerned about what was going on, and so they signed the so-called Declaration of Pillnitz, which you see there. And Declaration of Pillnitz didn't really say anything. It just said that it was the duty of all crown heads of Europe, of all monarchs, to go and restore order in France in reaction to this great fear. Well, the emigres said, oh, thanks, guys, took the paper, went back into the assembly, waving that around, said, all of Europe is going to be on our heads. You guys need to stand down, let the king go. And instead of them backing down, it had the exact opposite effect. It galvanized the assembly against these outside interference. And not only that, it actually caused France to declare war on Austria. Yeah. Which, of course, puts Marie Antoinette, who is still only under house arrest, in a precarious position. So let's get to it, shall we? We are here. Louis then reluctantly signed the Constitution of on July the 14th, 1790, saying, I support the revolution. I'm a patriot just like you guys are. I'm for new changes and modern changes in France. And I am going to be a good king and do exactly what you guys, and nobody trusted him. The major four powers saw this declaration of the rights of man as dangerous because, I mean, they did, because the Declaration actually says all men are created equal. And yeah, that was really dangerous. For example, and this is off the topic. For example, the great Mozart, the great musical composer Mozart, his most memorable play is The Marriage of Figaro. And The Marriage of Figaro is a play where common people look like they have it all together and they're wise, and the noble elites look like a bunch of bumbling fools. And it's comedy, it's a farce. And Mozart, who produced the opera, actually got in trouble with his admirer, got in trouble with the Emperor of Austria, Leopold II, for producing that controversial story. So anyway, so the major powers, yeah, they saw the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen as being dangerous. And as it says there, parties formed within the assemblies like the Jacobins and the Girondins. Yes, the Jacobin Party and the Girondins. And we went over those in the other film, didn't we? Didn't we? Jacobins are radicals, Girondins are moderates, and you already know all that, don't you? The Jacobins had pressed for republic and not constitutional monarchy. In other words, get rid of the king, and which, to be real honest, it inevitably means killing the king. The Girondins were also opposed to counter-revolutionary activities. Oh, I like big words, and I cannot lie. Counter-revolutionary. Counter-revolutionary, that means against the revolution, against the French Revolution. This also led the Assembly in declaring war on Austria. Louis XVI and the other monarchists actually favored the war. Yeah, see, Louis XVI, when this war happened, he went, "Oh, I hope we kill him." But in actuality, Louis XVI hoped that France lost because that he knew then that he would be restored to the throne. But they pretended to be for it. And other monarchists favored the war. There was a hope the conflict would strengthen the power of the monarchy, and even hope that French forces would be defeated and restore the old regime. And the war at first, in fact, did go poorly, which made it really dangerous for the king. It increased the distrust for the king. There were rumors going around that Marie Antoinette, who was Austrian, was sending information back to the Austrians. And then there was a threat by the Duke of Brunswick. Duke of Brunswick was a Prussian prince. He said he would destroy Paris if the royal family were harmed. And once again, instead of forcing the National Assembly, the radicals to back down, it once again, there's that word, galvanized them. It solidified their public opinion. It hardened their resolve against them. And so instead of backing down, look, on August the 10th, 1792, a very large Parisian crowd forced the royal family to leave the Tuileries Palace. Remember, they used to live in Versailles. They were forced to move to Paris and lived in the old Tuileries Palace, which was, still a nice digs. But they forced them to leave that and to move into the Assembly Hall itself, into smaller chambers where they could be more easily looked after. And in the midst of this, a melee broke out between Parisians, these citizens, and the Swiss guards. And many of those Swiss guards killed citizens, killed these riders, and then, as a result of that, what was the left of the bodyguards of the French king. Sorry, let me back up a minute. Yeah, the French king had his own personal bodyguards, and by tradition, just like with the papacy in Rome, the guards of the French king, to this very day, still in Rome, are Swiss. They're Swiss soldiers. And those Swiss soldiers, many of whom died defending their king to keep them from being snatched up and moved, and those who were later left over and captured and beheaded. You see that? This is a very famous monument, which is now in the southern part of France. If you notice, it shows a dead lion. The dead lion represents the guards, the French guards, not French, I'm sorry, the Swiss guards who died defending the French king. Notice the lion has a lance in his side. Notice that there's a shield there, and that shield has the symbol of Switzerland on it. I hope I can find this. Pictures. I know I have this somewhere. I think I have it under monument. Hadrian's Wall. Manchester. And look, I told you. There, this will give you a better picture of it. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. See, this is a monument to Swiss Guards. You see a broken lance here, the shield there. The shield, it's hard to see, has the symbol, the cross, the symbol of Switzerland upon it. I'm sorry, that's the French fleur-de-lis. Somewhere here they have the symbol of Switzerland on here. Yeah, this was a monument to, yeah, there it is. See that symbol there? That is the symbol, the cross is the symbol of Switzerland. But yeah, and see the lance in the side. Yeah. But pretty cool, huh? You probably don't think it's as cool as I do, but yeah. All right, so back to the matter at hand. So actually, the first real casualties of the French Revolution and the first casualties of the guillotine were those Swiss guards. Then later on, in early September, in what was called the September Massacre, when there was, the Prussian army was closing in on Paris, and as the army approached Paris, there was a fear that if the army entered Paris and they had all these royalists who were in prison, that if these royalists got out, that they would, betray the revolution. And so this mob went into the prisons and dragged these people out. And these royalists were, yeah, many of them were members of the nobility. Many of them were priests, many of them, and nuns. Many of them were just butlers and maids. And this was a horrific massacre because they dragged them out. Multiple women were raped, nuns included, and they literally tore them apart, hacked them to pieces with machetes and swords and axes and things of that nature out on the street. And it was, see, that was really, Europe was watching that. There were newspapers reporting on that, and yeah, it just shocked the rest of Europe, particularly the members of the aristocracy, particularly the members of, royal families. They all went, that could happen here, that could happen to us. And so, out of this, after this September massacre, a new government called the Convention declared France a republic. The king was around, but he was no longer a king anymore. He was there, he was under house arrest. And so, declared France a republic. The sans-culotte, a good term that you know will be on your test. I wish some of my students were in here in front of me, some of them who spoke French, or at least took French, and I would, of course, plague them. Sans-culottes. Sans, in French, means the same as sin, S-I-N, in Spanish. It means without. Culottes, in French, means pants. And so the sans-culottes were men without pants. Actually, what it meant was that these were people who, as a way of showing their solidarity, they rejected the fashion of the upper classes. Because prior to the French Revolution, fashionable men wore, their pants were like knee breeches. They were relatively tight-fitting silk, normally, pants that went down to just below the knee. If you've ever seen pictures of our own founding fathers, they wore them, the culottes. Well, they didn't call it culottes, but they wore them. Well, the sans-culottes, they didn't wear them. Instead, they wore these long trousers. Actually, what we would call pants. These long linsey woolsey means homemade. They're made out of homemade material, wool, linen, linsey woolsey, material, and they're baggy and kind of sloppy looking. And yeah, so these people called the sans-culotte. Sans-culotte took more and more of a role in radicalisms. That means in these horrific actions in Paris. Radical, there's the word, radicalism. Actions for change, violent actions for change. Now you've learned a good word, and I hope you keep that the rest of your life. The sans-culottes wanted relief from the food shortages and rising prices. The sans-culottes wanted to impose price controls. Now, keep in mind that at its heart, the French Revolution is supposed to be about freedom. It's supposed to be about applying the ideas of the Enlightenment. Okay? And the Enlightenment was, if you remember, the leading economic voice, the leading economic intellect of the Enlightenment was Adam Smith. And the last thing that Adam Smith would have ever been for would be price. I mean, price controls means that the government would say a loaf of bread costs this much and no more. And yeah, that's price control. Aside from the fact that price controls don't work. They simply don't work because price controls kill incentive. I mean, come on, if you know that you're only going to make so much money to do a certain thing, how hard are you going to work to increase your production, for example? And the answer, it doesn't work. But these people wanted to have price controls, which of course offended many other guys amongst the Jacobins because they sold the bread. They were people of money. And so the sans-culottes, who were one part of the Jacobins, wanted price controls. Others surely didn't want it. The sans-culottes did not advocate the abolition of private property, but they were in favor of the people ruling as directly as possible and didn't even like representative bodies such as the National Assembly, the convention. The Jacobins were Republicans who sought representative government. They hated the aristocracy. They hated the privilege of the clergy and the aristocracy and the nobility. They favored an unregulated economy. Yeah, now that's more what Adam Smith was like. And the reason they favored an unregulated economy was not because they were high-minded Adam Smith followers. It was because they could make money from an unregulated economy. But in spite of all this, as it says there, the Jacobins and the sans-culottes joined together and dominated the assembly, that part of the assembly called the Mountain. Now, remember, it's on the other lecture. I showed you the diagram, the Mountain. All right. Now, so the king's not the king. The radical Jacobin party wants a republic, but there's still a king. I mean, he's not the king, but he's still there. As long as he's still alive, the Jacobins know that as long as he's still alive, every time things go bad in the revolution, every time things go bad in this new government, people are going to say, well, I wish we had the king back. And so the Jacobins decided we can't have this guy around. And I mean, not even living in exile. I mean, we can't have this guy alive. And so, notice that part D, it says Citizen Capet. That is a reference to Louis XVI. His real, even though he was a Bourbon, his real family name was Capet. Citizen Capet, and that became what he was called. By the way, everyone called everyone else citizen. For example, in the Russian Revolution, everybody called everybody else comrade, citizen. Citizen Capet. I mean, he no longer has a title, everybody's title, same, citizen. Citizen Capet was put on trial for his life for, treason. And even though the Girondists tried to spare his life, They in turn were blocked by the Mountain, the Jacobins, at his trial on January 21st, 1793, and then he was executed. And, that's his execution was quite, of course, any execution would be quite interesting. The guillotine was a device, Guillotin, the guillotine. The guillotine was a device. A lot of people say it was invented by a guy named Dr. Guillotine. That's not true. Dr. Guillotine was a doctor who, in a magazine, wrote an article which commented on, approved of the guillotine as a merciful form of capital punishment. A way of bringing sudden death, quick death, and it'd be the same for everybody. And so, yeah, and the guillotine was a death machine. The person was laid down on a board, tied to the board, slid under the device, and then the blade drops. And the blade, if you ever look at the blade of a guillotine, it does not chop the head off. The blade is angled. So, and it drops straight down. It drops straight down like this. It doesn't chop the head off. It slices the head off. And you say, what's the difference? Well, if you drop it like this, yes, that chops the head off if it goes all the way through. It sometimes has a tendency to stick. But this, with a lot less force, you drop this angle blade straight down and it slices the head off. It has a lot of weight going behind it, and the head is sliced off. I mean, if you've ever watched them slice meat in a deli at Kroger, it's the same principle. They have that circular slicer, to slice the meat, and yeah, the motion. Basically, think of the motion of the spinning blade. Well, the same thing with the guillotine. And so, yeah, on the day that he was found guilty of treason, that night he went to the home. He went up to talk to his family, and of course everybody was wailing and crying, and because he was going to die the next day, and he promised that before he left to be executed, he'd come back and see them in the morning. I promised that he never intended to fulfill and didn't fulfill. He couldn't do it, I mean, he had children. By this time, he had like 5 children. And so, he's just, no, I can't do that. Then when he left, they brought the royal carriage for him, which was a blessing, because think of this, the guillotine is maybe a mile away in the main square in Paris, and he rides in the carriage, which protected him, because as he rode, this horse, slow, plodding horse, walking down the street, on each side of the street there were the mobs who were jeering at him, screaming at him, throwing stuff at him. And now think about it, on a street where horses normally trod, what kind of things do you think you're going to find on the street to throw at somebody? Yeah. And so he was protected by that. And then finally he gets to the elevated stand of the guillotine, which is elevated high enough so people can see it. It's amazing to me. People want to go watch that. But yes, the crowd, of course, was shoulder to shoulder. And he gets up, tries to make a speech. He's drowned out by the drum roll. And then they strap him onto the board, lay him down, slide him under the blade. And of course, then the guillotine falls, and that's it. So after the death of Louis XVI, there were countries in Europe who hated France. There were countries in Europe who were against France. But after the death of Louis XVI, every country in Europe was against this revolution. because they understood what was going on here. Here, once again, the common people were rising up, placing their hands on their betters, causing chaos. And the crown heads of all the other countries could understand that that could happen here as well. And so just about every country in Europe was against the revolution. The Girondins had started the war, but they could neither win nor manage it. But the Mountain, the Jacobins, were more than ready to try it. At first, most European nations were ambivalent about the revolution. In fact, a lot of European nations, when the revolution got started, they were saying, oh, good, France needs to be taken down a peg, and this way we don't have to do anything. But by the end of it, everybody was involved in the revolution and against the revolution. Okay. Originally, all the major powers just thought France would no longer be a major player. They had no idea how this thing was going to go. Edmund Burke, a very famous historical writer. I don't think that he was. Edmund Burke, a very famous English historical writer, wrote a book called Reflections on the Revolution, which was took a very dim view of the French Revolution, of course. His book became a handbook, though, for European conservatives for generations to come. In other words, after this French Revolution, Europe is going to become a very conservative place. See how we're using that word already? Conservatism is going to reign in Europe. Anti-change, anti-freedom, anti-liberalism is going to rule for 60 years in Europe because of the revolution. The revolution represents the ideas of the Enlightenment swinging too far, and they have to be brought back. And so more and more countries around Europe became more and more repressive after the spread of Burke's thoughts. He was against the revolution. Suppression in Britain was mild comparatively, so William Pitt the Younger turned against the reform and popular movement. The government suppressed the London Corresponding Society. You say, what is the London Corresponding Society? It's this debating club where they would, talk about issues of government and oftentimes criticize the government. And in England, when the revolution was raging in France, the English were saying, well, we can't have too much freedom, so they censored which means they destroyed many of their papers. England drove Joseph Priestley, the great chemist, out of the country, and in 1793 they suspended habeas corpus for certain acts. Habeas corpus. You don't remember? Habeas corpus? Yeah, habeas corpus, once again, is the right to know. It means is the right to know why you're being charged for a crime. And even in liberal England in 1793, they suspended that act for certain crimes. Okay. I'll tell you what, why don't we call it a day, and we will pick up tomorrow on Friday. Yeah. Make sure you look at that other study guide, that other assignment for this day. I know I did 2 of them for today. Okay? Because you need that going forward. You need that going forward. That's why I had to separate it. You need that going forward. Okay. So I think I'll stop sharing now. Have a good day. Bye now.